Hey, welcome to the June 8th edition of To Date MMA. We're your hosts, MJ and Flip. MJ. On to quick news. Gustafsson is out until October with a broken hand. Sorry to see that happen. This kid's an up-and-coming star, but these things happen. So hopefully he'll be in action towards the end of the year here. We've got Bibiano Fernandes, the current Dream champion. Dream, if any of you don't know, is now a defunct organization, completely bankrupt. So Bibiano is going to come over to the UFC. He's now going to be fighting at 135 pounds. For those of you that don't know, Bibiano's got wins over Joe Warren and Joaquim Hansen. He does hold losses, though, to Uriah Faber and Kid Yamamoto. So we'll see how he does in his UFC debut. Also, Dongyi Yang, Kamal Shalarus, Jeff Curran, George Lopez, all of them got the axe this week for their recent losses. In some interesting news as well, Ian McCall just tweeted last night that he was 150 pounds ahead of his fight tomorrow night. So, Flip, when a guy comes down and he's already cutting all the way down to 125 pounds, and then he rehydrates all the way to 150 pounds, is that healthy? Is that normal?
Yeah, it's pretty common. Back in my wrestling days, I would walk in on Monday, be weighing about 140 pounds. Mm-hmm. I could cut down to 125 by the weekend. By any stretch, these guys, they have more time to cut that kind of weight. So sometimes, Ian McCall's probably walking around about 150, 160 pounds. So just from rehydrating alone, getting those nutrients in, if he's doing it properly also, just kind of slow loading a little bit of the carbs and getting everything else kind of built up. I mean, you're looking at, they probably weigh in, 4 o'clock? Mm-hmm. That's 8 hours, by midnight. That's plenty of time to start kind of getting that weight pack back on. So, I mean, you could probably look at him walking around about 160. Wow. Come fight time. It just really just depends if he has like a little quick workout. Most guys don't, but he'll probably be walking around 155, 160 leading up to fight time. Wow,
it's pretty interesting because Demetrius Johnson, supposedly he walks around pretty light. I guess he does cut down to 125, but I think supposedly his walk around rate's usually between 135 and 140 pounds. So it'll be interesting in this matchup to see how McCall does with that weight advantage. In current matchups that were just announced over the last week, we've got Hector Lombard now fighting Tim Boetsch. Lombard tweeted to Bisping challenging him. Bisping turned out to be, injured. And then you've got Stan out. So now we've got Tim Boetsch coming in. I mean, how do you think Boetsch is going to match up versus Lombard?
Yeah, I think it'll be... it's touch and go on that. I mean, you got to realize that we've seen Tim Boetsch perform at heavier weights. Mm-hmm. Everything that he's done here hasn't really been too much of the going to the ground and facing guys that have the kind of wrestling credentials and background that Hector Lombard does. If I'm remembering correctly, I think he's an Olympic wrestler. Olympic or judo. So, I mean, even at the takedowns and that level, I mean, we haven't seen Tim Boetsch really play too much at 185 with those kinds of guys. Yeah. His hands, obviously, they're heavy. Yeah. Last time when he fought Yushin Okami, I kind of basically called it out and said, he can come back at any given time. He just has to want it bad enough. Yeah. So, given that he's shown that kind of heart and determination and comeback, from losing a match, I think that he can come back and beat Hector Lombard. The big thing with Hector Lombard is he takes guys out fairly, he basically outworks them. His judo is really good, and he's able to kind of, beat him. And he's a massive guy. So, you're looking at two big guys. They're coming in, and it really just depends on game planning and who's going to institute the better game plan going into that fight.
Yeah, definitely. It's going to be an interesting matchup. All right, and then we've got Shogun now fighting Brandon Vera. Shogun was supposed to be matched up versus Thiago Silva at UFC 149, and Vera was supposed to fight James Detuna at the next Fuel card. Now they're both going to be fighting each other. Interesting matchup. I mean, it's probably going to be a fun one to watch. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting for the first 30 seconds, first minute or so. I don't see the fight going any different than the Shogun Forrest fight. Mm-hmm. Shogun's going to come out, probably just pretty much blast him and go right through him. Yeah. Vera just hasn't looked the same since he lost that fight to Tim Sylvia, and then of course he had the contractual issues. Mm-hmm. And on his comeback, he hasn't looked the same. He lost a fight at heavyweight that I think he pretty much won. He winds up. Fighting a pretty crappy fight against Keith Jardine, mm-hmm. Dropping the decision to Randy Couture, which some people also felt that Brandon Vera could have won. But just looking at his last outing against Elliot Marshall, I mean, mm-hmm. it's just kind of hard to see that somebody with the talent that Shogun has, coming out and just falling flat against Brandon Vera, especially considering, Elliot Marshall coming back and I think taking a 10-8 round in that last round.
Yeah.
So I think Shogun's just going to blast straight through Brandon Vera. I mean, it's cool for, name value as a main event or a co-main event, but I don't see it being that interesting of a fight to me.
Yeah, unfortunately, I could see this being, potentially Brandon Vera's last fight in the UFC. I think if he doesn't come out and at least perform really well, he's probably going to get cut. So, good luck to both guys. Then we've got, of course, BJ Penn making his way out of retirement to come fight Rory MacDonald. BJ made some funny comments about, fighting a TriStar guy again. I don't know, man. I don't understand why BJ Penn is coming out at welterweight, to fight Rory MacDonald. I think if he was serious, he should just cut back down to 155 and make a run there. A really healthy game, in shape BJ Penn is dangerous. At least in my book, more dangerous than he is at welterweight. Yeah,
the thing with BJ Penn is I can see why he's taking this fight, and whether it's at 170 or 155, I think that he's kind of at the point right now where he made those comments where he said he was going to retire and he wanted to spend more time with his family. I have no problem seeing BJ Penn coming out fighting once, twice a year, taking interesting matchups, especially with guys that are up-and-comers like Rory MacDonald. When it comes to this fight, honestly, I think that it's a safe play for BJ Penn. I think he has the experience. Rory MacDonald is still kind of inexperienced if you look at his matchups. And it kind of showed in that Carlos Condit match where, he dominated those first 2 rounds, but then he, drops it at the very tail end.
Yeah.
That's the sort of thing that you can see happening in a fight with BJ Penn. Rory MacDonald, even though he is a TriStar product, he differs from George St. Pierre in the style of wrestling. He doesn't have that blast through takedown. His takedowns are usually off of the feet. Something a little more of a Greco style. A lot of guys have trouble getting BJ to the ground in that sort of fight, and we haven't seen him fight a top-notch jiu-jitsu guy like BJ Penn.
Yeah, that's true.
So it is very possible that he can easily reverse Rory MacDonald, take his back, get his trademark rear naked choke. Some people are going to say that Rory did fight Nate Diaz. Huge size difference in that.
Right.
BJ Penn, he comes in at 170. He's not totally a small 170 pounder, but he's a good size, and I think that he's a good test for Rory MacDonald. And if Rory MacDonald wins, that throws him up to the upper echelon of the 170 pound division. And I think it's a perfect test for him.
Yeah. The interesting thing though is if BJ loses this fight, then what? Does he go back into retirement? Because
no, he doesn't have to.
I guess I don't see him gaining anything from this. He'll take a little momentum away, from Rory, if he gets the win, but if he loses, man,
it's also it gives everybody a good gauge as to what BJ Penn wants to do with his career. If he does lose, we find out if he really is serious about retirement. If he does want to continue on with the UFC, I see no reason why he shouldn't continue on.
Right.
He's still a fairly young guy. He can, like I said, take interesting matchups. If he loses to Rory MacDonald, it's a bit dangerous for BJ in that way. But I really feel that it's more on the safe side for him. It gives him a good test. It's still a top-notch athlete, who's young and coming up.
Sure.
And it gives BJ a good chance to really test his skills and see where he stands and see if he still wants to fight. I think, like I said earlier, if BJ does 1-2 fights a year against some pretty quality opponents or even interesting opponents, I don't think he's going to ever make a title run again at 170. Could be possible at 155, but when you have guys like Jose Aldo about to move up to 155 here pretty soon, obviously he's had his problems with Frankie Edgar, and I just think that it's good to see BJ just back. Yeah,
definitely. A lot of fans are going to be really excited for that fight. Last matchup we want to talk about, this is a potential matchup, is Roy Nelson wants the winner of Czech Congo versus Nogueira. So I thought that'd be pretty cool. I mean, first, let's break down, if Roy does get his wish, let's say Congo comes out and shocks the world and beats Nogueira. I think Nelson would match up really good against Congo.
I see that fight going pretty similar to Frank Mir. I mean, he has what it takes on the ground to sub him. He has that heavy right hand, and that's obviously what Frank Mir caught Congo with when they fought. I don't know. It could be something where Congo might outwork Roy Nelson to a decision. It's always possible. Yeah. But after seeing that Matt Mitrione fight, I don't think that that Congo has that drive where he's going to push through the full 3 rounds, or if it winds up being a main event for some reason, even 5 rounds. I think Nelson wins that.
Now, what about Nelson Nogueira? I don't think that fight would ever happen. I don't know. I don't think Dana White will put it together or Joe Silva, but if it did happen, that'd be interesting to see it go to the ground. I don't know.
It is an interesting fight. I think on the ground it would be pretty cool. But you have to look at Nogueira's boxing. I think is just technically a lot more sound than Roy Nelson's. It would probably go pretty similar to the Fabricio Verdum fight. That's what I'm thinking. Yeah. He'll just kind of pick him apart on the feet. Nelson probably won't go down. I don't see Nelson taking Nogueira down. And if it goes to the ground, I think Nelson has the tools to kind of escape a lot of those subs, but I don't think he has the tools to actually sub Nogueira. But then again, it's MMA, you never know. I didn't think that Frank Mir had the chops to be able to sub him, and obviously he did. So
he did just that. All right, now on to a couple hot topics here. It's kind of a mixed bag here. Brent Rogers has just signed with Bellator. I don't think they've quite announced who he's going to go up and fight against. There's a lot of backlash against Brent Rogers for some domestic violence issues. And, there's a lot of haters out there. Brent Rogers dropped a couple of big fights. He's been really kind of wishy-washy. Obviously, he's got, issues at home. He's got issues with his wife. He's got probably issues with his camp and probably his whole career. With that said, though, he had some pretty good, convincing, knockout wins in Strikeforce. And, it's funny that, a lot of people were on the bandwagon with Brent Rogers, and a lot of people just jumped right off. And now they want to even say that, because of his issues at home, which I've heard he's reconciled with his wife. So obviously his wife's okay with things. They want to kind of write him off and say, you shouldn't fight anymore because you're a jerk at home.
As the sport grows, I mean, this is just my opinion on it. As the sport grows, you're going to have situations like this. So, MMA prided itself for a very long time on people that fought MMA were educated. You had, Chuck Liddell, Randy Couture, these guys, they all had degrees. Yeah. Great businessmen like Tito Ortiz who could build a brand and do great things with it. Yeah. But it was still a really small community. What happens is, post-tough, you have everybody in their family getting into MMA. They're all fighters. They're all, jumping in there and doing it. And, the more people that you have in MMA, the better your chances are of a situation like this arising. People are people. Everybody has their issues. Floyd Mayweather, as we all know, he's just serving some time right now. Yeah. For for domestic violence issues as well. These things happen, and whether a person should fight or not after situations like that, that's up to commissions. The fans don't really make those decisions, but obviously if Bellator thinks that bringing him in as a big name helps boost Bellator's roster, I mean, then obviously it's a good business choice for Bellator. Yeah. The UFC and Zuffa in general, along with Strikeforce, they do have a reputation for cutting people for situations such as this. Yeah. They try to, basically make their fighters come out in the best light. We saw them get rid of Miguel Torres for, and bring him back essentially for his comments on rape. Yeah. We also, we've seen some fighters or sponsors that were potentially let go just because they had Nazi symbols on their clothing. Right. So, the UFC tries to be a little more PC in what it is, in the fighters that they keep, in the situations that they approach. Yeah. But I mean, that's like saying that Ariane should get the boot just because she had domestic violence the other day. So
that's true. I guess the other issue for me is Bellator's heavyweight division is just now. The other thing with Brent Rogers is, I mean, within the Bellator umbrella, I mean, you've got Cole Conrad there, and he's pretty much the dominant heavyweight there, but he's pretty much the only heavyweight. And the thing that's going to happen to Brent Rogers is just like Cole Conrad did to Eric Prindle. He's just going to take him down. He's going to beat him up, and he's going to sub him quickly. Because if anybody watched the the heavyweight Grand Prix from Strikeforce, Josh Barnett took Brent Rogers down and just destroyed him just like that. And Cole Conrad has that really strong base, and he's really good with Kimuras and Americanas. So he's probably going to do the same thing. So
yeah, I mean, the thing is that Brent Rogers just he became a household name, overnight success story when he, essentially got the opportunity to fight Fedor Emelianenko. Other than that, I just hadn't really followed much of the guy's career other than his fight in the heavyweight Grand Prix. I mean, he never interested me as far as being a dynamic fighter or anything like that. So I never really kind of followed him. I just know that his name just because he fought Fedor Emelianenko, and that's pretty much the size of it. I mean, you can't get famous for losing to somebody, but...
No, that's true. Well, hopefully Brett's working on his ground game, because if he goes to Bellator and he gets through the next heavyweight tournament, he's going to have a nasty ground game to face with Cole Conrad. All right, last on the list today, Carlos Condit calling out Martin Kampmann. Now, he tweeted and called him out right as everybody was finding out that Kampmann was going to take care of his knee surgery. Okay, so this bugs me on one area because, okay, did Condit know, and was Condit just trying to make himself look good, look like he's not ducking fights so that he can wait for GSP? And then second to that, right after that, you got Johnny Hendricks tweeting, calling Condit out, and Condit has not responded. So kind of twofold. Do you think Condit knew? Maybe, was he not watching the fights? Was he not watching the post-fight press conference?
A lot of times we don't watch the post-fight press conferences. I mean, it is possible that he's probably hungry to avenge that loss. He was coming off of a tear. He comes into the UFC. He's pretty hyped, and essentially, Martin Kampmann just started working with basic technique, and he was able to get that decision. And since then, Condit's been on a tear as well. In various media outlets, everybody's kind of pretty upset that Condit has kind of decided to wait for GSP. The whole point of the interim title is that you fight and you keep that number one contender status or champion status until GSP is ready to come back out. Apparently, GSP and his camp have released a statement that he's going to have an idea of his time frame for next week. So with Kampmann going into that knee surgery and taking the time off, he's been kind of working pretty hard this last year in general with some of the matchups he took. I don't see a problem with Condit fighting, Johnny Hendricks in the meantime. I think Johnny Hendricks has earned it. And so then you have, Johnny Hendricks is basically coming out and saying that Carlos Condit doesn't feel that Johnny Hendricks is in the same league or that he deserves that shot because he wants to fight Kampmann. So the question for Johnny Hendricks is if you're the number one contender right now, or you have the interim belt and Rick Story was the top contender versus Martin Kampmann, who would you take the fight with? You'd probably want to avenge that loss to Rick Story because you know that you're better than him and you know that you can beat him. I'm not saying that that's necessarily the case with Condit and Kampmann, but it's very possible that Condit could beat Kampmann. He's had some big fights. He's had some great exposure to some top tier athletes since he's been in the UFC. So why wouldn't you want to avenge that loss and then still be able to fight for the title in the process?
Yeah, definitely. One thing that I've been thinking all week is, the UFC could pretty easily, remedy this situation if, whenever they, institute an interim title, they make it a clause that, you're going to fight for that interim title and then you've got to defend it at least once. And that way it makes sense, and now, most of the time when they do these interim titles, it's because the champ's going to be out for at least 6 months. So it only makes sense to, get two guys together, have them fight for that interim title, and then make them, defend it. And that solves the problem right there. And, in the words of Nick Diaz, come on, Condit, don't be scared, homie. But seriously, that's the funny thing with this, too. If I was Carlos Condit, and I'm a big Carlos Condit fan, I think Condit matches up really good against Johnny Hendricks. I think he picks him apart and he could probably just demolish him within a couple rounds. I think the part that he's scared about is that he wants that big money fight versus Georges St. Pierre, and Johnny Hendricks has some serious power in his hands. So if you got caught, that would suck to lose the interim championship, but I don't know, man. You just got to step up. That's what I would say.
Yeah, Condit, he has all the tools. I've always been of the opinion that Carlos Condit could beat anybody in the 170-pound division just because of his ability to get up back to the feet and knock the hell out of people on the feet. I thought that if there was one person that he wouldn't be able to beat in the 170-pound division, it would have been Nick Diaz. Obviously he went in there with a great game plan. He stuck, he moved, he wanted on points, not the natural born killer that we like to see. But he was still able to pull out that win, and I think that with that win he can beat anybody else in a wrestling heavy 170-pound division. He can get up off the ground and he can batter him on the feet. That's just my opinion. But there's no reason why he needs to hide from either one of these guys. I think that he could beat Kampmann, and I really do think that he can beat Hendricks as well. Yeah,
I think just his level of competition that he's faced, and he's just been in the game longer. He's more well-rounded, and obviously from a coaching standpoint, coming out of Jackson's, like his game plan is going to be on point. So I don't see any reason why he shouldn't just step up, just beat up Johnny Hendricks, and then move on to GSP. So. Well, that's about it for Flip and MJ here. Make sure and check us out. We're going to have our MMA Monthly show coming up. We're also going to have post-fight aftermath, post-fight analytics show coming up soon as well. And for more additional coverage and exclusive content, make sure and check us out at fightlifemedia.com.